Welcome, adventurers, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today we're talking about resiliency in the job hunt, something that we all care about in recent history, with Tim Wood of Right Fighter Headhunting, as well as Cheeky Sausage Games.
Hello.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
I never cease to stop enjoying listening to that intro. In our live magical podcast, we give devs the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. This is a mostly unedited recording of a weekly event we host here in our Discord, Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern, so we would love to have you in the next one. You can ask your own questions live and just hang out. It's a lot of fun. I'm your host, as always, Willem Delventhal, the headmaster of the Indie Game Academy, and the Wizard of Joy, the Purple Wizard. I was there at the beginning with Gandalf or whatever. All right. And joining me today is Tim Wood. Tim is a wonderful personal friend. He's worked with us a number of times in the past. He is the founder of Right Finder Headhunting, so he is a recruiter in the game industry. But more recently, he's also become one of us production folks, acting as creative director at Cheeky Sausage Games. Tim, welcome to the show. What are you having for lunch today?
Thanks for having me. For lunch today, it was usually coffee, but I've got myself a little kind of pesto vegan chicken dish with some pasta. Because I'm going rock climbing later, so I'm going to need the protein and carbs to
need the carbs.
Cling to the wall in fear.
Are you a climber? Like, how much climbing do you do?
I climbed for the first time in probably a decade and a half, maybe last week. I got halfway up the auto belay wall, got scared and came down. So maybe today I'll go 3/4 of the way up. We'll see.
Amazing. I believe in you. I for a brief period of time, it was like probably about a year, I guess, I was going climbing twice a week. I was like hardcore climbing.
Nice.
Yeah, mostly because of my brother, who is an actual climber, one of those.
Cool.
And yes, at some point in my life, he made me go up Royal Arches, which is a pretty famous and beloved climb in Yosemite. It is 17 pitches. If you're unfamiliar with what a pitch means, that means you have to stop and pull up your rope and then start again 17 times to get to the top.
Oh my gosh.
And the final pitch, it's a 2,000-foot mountain. The final pitch was quite literally, I'm not exaggerating. I'm prone to exaggeration. I am not exaggerating. I think maybe the scariest moment that I can remember in my entire life.
I don't think
it was stressful. Yeah, I mean, I barely got up that mountain, so you're probably not that far behind me, but I did do it.
Yeah, well, at least you pushed through. That's the main thing.
Yeah. I still, to this day, have a kind of janky right shoulder as a result.
Oh my gosh.
So that's a perfect metaphor for resiliency in the game industry job hunt. Wow.
It really is.
It kind of is, actually. That we didn't do that on purpose, but it worked out. Tim, before we talk about that, though, as always, we'd love to start with your origin story. Now, you've been on the show before, so we've had it before, but I'd still love to hear it. Tell us how you got started and how you got to where you are today, Tim.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I've had a very eclectic life, and I have always kind of done things I felt were worthy of a good story, particularly in my kind of late teens and early adulthood. I kind of first started taking the steps on doing things my own way when I finished A levels, which is kind of, I guess, high school over in the States for you folks. Where all my teachers and everyone was like, Tim, you must go to university. That is the route to success in life. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. I'd been doing a couple of different subjects like media, psychology, world development, which is the social side of geography. And none of it particularly interested me. And I knew that if I went to university, I'd spend most of my time partying and playing video games, which I discovered you can do on a salary. So it was kind of my intro to networking. My sister at the time introduced me to someone who was hiring for call center workers for a charity based in the area, basically to bring people up and ask for donations. So I did that for the first couple of months of my career, and gradually transitioned into a range of different industries, from social services, investigations, right round to kind of general sales and that kind of thing. And I got a job as a recruiter for a civil engineering company as a recruitment administrator, processing people's job applications, writing job descriptions, kind of entry level recruitment work. And I gradually transitioned my career to there. And I've been very fortunate to work in some really cool sectors of, charity, media, cybersecurity, technology. Um, and I've kind of always used LinkedIn ever since my first ever job. I think it was the recruiter that recruited me for my first job at the time was like, "Hey, you should get on LinkedIn and follow our company page." So I just made one, and started going around. And I thought, "Oh, this networking is quite good." And also, I've probably not got as many qualifications as other people going for these jobs have. So if I make a really good LinkedIn and just get a recommendation for every job I've ever worked in, it will make me look better, and then I'll have more of a chance of getting a job and earning money to live and survive. Because there's been points in my life where I literally was living off Poundland hot dogs and instant noodles because my rent was an extortionate sort of £400 for a room, and I was barely making that.
True
I've
resiliency.
Yeah, I've just seen a question come up saying Poundland. Poundland is a shop in the UK where, well, it used to everything in there was just a pound, but it's considered like a high street bargain store. Yes, I am an avid follower of Greg's as well. Their sausage rolls are to die for. Um, but yeah, so I've been through many situations in my life. I've endured my own sort of rounds of layoffs in different fields, redundancies, or companies going under. And at the time, living in Oxford and later London, they are very expensive places to live. And losing your job meant you would probably lose your house within a couple of weeks, especially if you didn't get a payout. So I had to rapidly get good at finding any work very quickly. So my usual strategy for that was putting a post on LinkedIn, networking actively there, using the recruitment agencies for whatever field I worked in. In later years, that was recruitment. So recruiters actually have specific recruitment agencies to find them recruitment agency jobs. They're called recruitment to recruitment firms. And I just kind of used any and all advantages I could. And in later years, I transitioned into the video game industry, which is currently feels like it's on fire. There's a lot
I don't know
of
what you mean.
yeah. I don't know if any of you have been following the news in the last what feels like 2 years, but there's layoffs are rife. There's a lot of hurt out there. A lot of people in very dicey situations, and it has brought me back to thinking about the times I've been looking for work or had the rug pulled out from under me, and I can only empathise with the situation. It's horrific, for want of a better word. So yeah, it's kind of why I'm doing these events and just kind of sharing my own survival tips for what I've done in the past and also what I've witnessed being a professional in the recruitment sector as well. I guess that's most of my origin story. In between that, I do a lot of sword fighting to keep the stress down.
I've always appreciated that about you. Yeah, I love one of the reasons I like running this show, and it's been especially gratifying as people start listening to it more, is because it's really true that so many of us come to game development from so many different walks of life. And you here are a perfect example of like, you didn't really know what you wanted to do with yourself for a long time. And yet you still found your way here. I'm curious, like, what was that first, you said, and I eventually transitioned into the game industry. What was that actual transition moment?
Yeah. So it was 2019, kind of height of COVID, and everything going on there. And at the time, I was running a copywriting agency I co-founded with some friends, and because I'm fairly outspoken on LinkedIn, especially when I was running copywriting stuff, I was basically just trying to be as funny as I could be online, so people would give me money to be funny for them. I kind of befriended a few different game developers. A good mate of mine was running a video game recruitment agency and made me a job offer. Because at the time I was also writing some bios for Dragon Fist VR Kung Fu for its absolute first ever prototype, which a Kung Fu master I knew was making. I was like, hey, these all kind of fit together. I love video games. I'm a huge gamer anyway. I play a lot of D&D. This feels like a natural sector for me. And I hadn't really thought about the fact that you can recruit in games, which is hilarious considering I had several years of recruitment experience. Just shows how much strategic thought I put into it back then. So I moved into my first kind of video game recruitment consultant role. I did that for just under a year, and in the process of working for someone else, I realized my true happiness for me is always going to be running my own sort of ship and having control of my life. That's been a theme throughout everything I've done. You know, when my parents would be like, Tim, do the washing up, in my head I might have been wanting to do the washing up, but I'd be like, no, I'm not going to do that now. So I like to be in charge of my own destiny.
Petulance.
And literally petulance, entrepreneurial spirit. I later found out
that's what they call it.
Neurodivergencies I've got, but that's fine. So I kind of created an environment which would allow me to thrive, but also let me do all my different random things on the side, because I don't just headhunt all the time. I am a writer, I am a creative, I like to have fun, and I do need a lot of control over my own schedule to give me those opportunities. So I'm in a really privileged position to be able to do all this cool stuff. So yeah, video games attracted me because it was fun, it was interesting. Obviously, height of COVID, there was a lot of investment and a lot of opportunity for recruiters. And I got to talk to people that were my heroes. I've spoken to some game developers who have made the games I grew up playing or continue to play to this day. There's been some times I've been on video calls and felt a huge degree of imposter syndrome because I'm like, oh my goodness, this super senior CEO or game director is asking me how they should recruit for their studio, and I still see myself to a degree as just some dude in England who just kind of finagled his way here.
I think we all feel like that to some degree, no matter what.
I think it's kind of almost natural when you're creatively inclined, like many of us are, that there's always that degree of self-analysis and looking at what you're doing. But that can very easily manifest into the more negative types of self-analysis, like imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I think to pull out something that I think is important for everybody here, the point I want to get across here, that the story is wonderful. I love how you transition through so many different things, but still that first entry point, which is what so many people are concerned with, and it definitely gets easier after that. But from personal experience, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, it is still, even after your first job, even after your first three jobs, the game industry still will be challenging basically forever, and that's something you kind of have to accept. That first job is still what concerns people the most, because once you have that first job, you're vetted, you're a little bit more likely to stay in the industry for sure. And I just want to point out that as we hear on this podcast, probably almost every episode, Tim's first job in games happened because of networking, happened because he knew somebody who needed help, and Tim was already doing the work, already proving himself to that person when they happened to need him. The timing was there and the networking was there. I think that's one of the best things you can do for yourself. Also, to call it out, yes, Rick and Eris, imposter syndrome is real and it never fades. You will never prove it wrong. In fact, I had a wonderful talk with my therapist about motivation and ambition based upon anxiety versus personal desire. And if you base it all upon anxiety, proving the anxious parts wrong, you will never, ever escape. All right, let's talk about resiliency. So, game industry is hard. I think, right? That's what I hear. Definitely really challenging. I have had my own projects canceled twice or been laid off twice now. And most people will tell you that's true. There's even like an old adage that if you haven't been laid off at least once, people don't respect you yet. How, Tim, Rick is just always on stage asking questions. How, Tim, do I build resiliency? How do I keep the ship moving forward, potentially keep money coming in the door, and keep my optimism high in this industry when it's going through all this turmoil?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to remember is I saw an interesting talk on that kind of 4 a.m. courage. Like, you kind of know who you are when it's 4 a.m, your mortgage is due, there's no food on the table, and you're really kind of worrying about what to do next. I would probably say for resiliency, you might not even need optimism, because a lot of people are very optimism empty right now, or optimism dry, because they have just been through the absolute ringer. But everyone turning up today to learn how to be resilient in the job search, everyone's still on LinkedIn, just trying to connect, looking for those jobs. I would say that's resiliency. I think it's the ability to keep carrying on despite being feeling like you're under constant fire. What's that quote from Game of Thrones where they say that courage is feeling the fear and doing it anyway? And I've really messed up that quote, but it's that kind of thing. I think it's to just try and maintain an attitude where you want to keep carrying on. So if you're able to kind of convert the attitude towards, as long as I'm following this framework and these steps towards getting myself into a position I want to be in, I am at least taking control over the things I can directly influence. I see it on Instagram all the time when I'm sort of stimming or just distracting myself from my day job. There's elements of stoicism in there or other methodologies where basically it's just like, keep going and you'll be okay. One of the things that's helped me a lot, I'm a vendor supplier to the games industry. All these studios have stopped recruiting and have lost funding. So I'm out there trying to drum up business for myself so I can keep my lights on. What I do is I set myself kind of realistic goals. So I break down essentially my job search into manageable tasks. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm really low energy today. The last thing I want to do is send out a load of business development emails and be told to get lost. But if I do at least 5 in the next hour, I can then give myself a reward of doing something else. And then I find once I get into that sort of routine of doing some things towards my process, I kind of start to feel a little bit better about myself, and I can only speak for how my own mind works, but that kind of enables me to sort of get a little snowball and keep pushing it and keep adding to it until it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I struggle with having a set routine just due to the type of human I am anyway, but what I've created for myself is sort of routine checkpoints, to steal some game design methodology. So whatever time I wake up, whether it's at 5 a.m. in a flash of inspiration or it's at 9 or 10 or whatever, I always think, right, I get up and I do my morning stuff, shower, dress, eat, walk the dog, sit down on the computer. I'll do an hour and a half of set work. Then me and my girlfriend, we have what we call a little coffee together. That's my first checkpoint. So we talk about what have I done in that hour and a half? What am I hoping to do for the rest of the afternoon? What are my objectives? I'll then work for a little bit longer. I'll take a lunch, probably a few hours after that. That's my checkpoint number 2. Back to work. Checkpoint number 3 is dinner, and then I'll probably stop working for a little bit, play a game, something like that. Throughout the day, I'm always plugged into my LinkedIn. I am a child of social media. A lot of my businesses rely on social media. All of my networking and most of my friends now are all in the States or all across the world. So it's kind of a bit of a lifeline for me as well. But whenever I connect with someone new, whether they are just entering the industry or they are a kind of a client lead for myself, I do my best to just send a message. Hey, how you doing? How are you finding the industry right now? What are you up to this week? In recent months, my inbox has exploded. I'm probably getting about 300 to 400 messages every 2 weeks, maybe more. So I go through them as best I can, but occasionally 1 or 2 slip through the cracks. One of the biggest things I've had to teach myself, because I am brutal to myself, I joke about it, but I'm my own worst critic, is to forgive myself. There are some days where I don't do very much, or I haven't got back to someone who actually really needed my input because I just missed their message because I had 400 million notifications. So it's just going, hey, I'm a human being at the end of the day. You can't give 100% all the time. If all I can do is 20% of my usual capacity that day, that is actually 100% for that day. So as long as I can say that I've done my best in spite of my circumstances, it's almost like a bit of a point of pride for me. And it can also be a driver. And essentially, it's just all those incremental steps you can take towards your goal, as long as you let them add up over time and you look at the the macro landscape of what you've achieved, you can actually see how much you can do when you're in those really stressful circumstances, when you're having troubled sleep, when you're maybe just needing to go outside and just leave the internet behind because you're sick of getting your 50th rejection in a row, or the people aren't responding the way you want. But if you can kind of keep going in spite of all that crap, you will eventually push through to the other side. You know, if you look at the games industry as a commercial industry, no one is going to be getting rid of their consoles or PCs en masse. Companies will always want to make money from studios to make games, and it is always going to be here. What we're seeing are the effects of huge amounts of COVID, a lot of greed, and as a result, we're seeing a lot of indies spring up, new studios and new ventures coming to the forefront. A little bit of insight from a recruitment agent, you know, the companies coming to me asking me for help come April, May, June, and, you know, basically next financial year, overwhelmingly are indie studios or co-devs. Reason for that, indie studios have control of a lot of what they want to do. If they've got an investor, it's probably because that investor is spreading their investment risk among lots of little companies rather than one big one. And co-developers are getting increasing levels of work because a lot of companies have laid people off. They want to move what they call their full-time employee equivalent risk to a co-dev. So those are the areas where we're probably going to see lots of jobs come up. Willem, I'm catching myself going on a huge tangent here, so I will bring myself back. But
I mean, I love it. I love the self-reflection. It's good. I think a lot of what you said is actually really valuable. I would love to summarize some of the points that I think I'm hearing, so we can talk about them, and so the audience can own them, use them. So here's what I think I'm hearing. I've got a couple of points, which is great. The first one is basically to take control. So whatever you are in control of, and whatever you can be in control of, is what you should actually be focusing on. And by the way, when you set goals, that's where the goals should be set. It's hard to be like, I'm going to get a job in the next 6 months, because you're not actually in control of that. Instead, you can definitely say, I'm going to apply for, 500 jobs in the next month, or whatever, something that you are directly in control of. So number one, take control. Number two, I really like this one. Split your day into manageable tasks, and then have those continuous routine check-in moments. I've never been diagnosed with anything, partly because I haven't asked, because I'm scared. But absolutely, I am not the kind of person who can do routine very well. I'm a very chaotic creative. I get a shitload done. If you look at like aggregate of my life, I work very hard. But on a daily basis, there's days where I don't do anything, and there's days where I'm going from sun up until 3 a.m. And that's I think like some of what I heard from you is like, stop trying to push back on the parts of you that you think may not be quite right, and instead adopt and embrace. Hey, this is me. I'm going to figure out the ways that this routine can work for me. Continuous networking, especially over LinkedIn. I don't know if you noticed this, Tim, but the LinkedIn app, the notifications the other day stopped working for a big part of the day, and I literally felt a hole in my stomach.
yeah.
I am definitely addicted. Keep those connections alive as well. So making connections is great, but think about it like maybe like a Chow. I don't know why that's the first thing I thought of, in your Chow gardens, or like a Digimon, or any kind of digital pet. Like, it's not just a connection to put in the bank. It's also something to keep alive over time, feed it, pet it, love it. So whenever, my like base tip is just, whenever you think of somebody, give a message. That's it. It's easy. And that way, like those people that you are thinking of the most, that you care about the most, you're sending the most messages, and you're keeping a lot of them alive. The own worst critic thing is a big part of this. Forgiving yourself. The job industry, the game industry, and jobs in the industry can be really hard. And so if you are beating yourself harder than anybody else, then you're just going to be getting beaten from 20 different angles. So do your best to let go of that. I saw some people in the comments, like Alec was talking about how that's part of how he holds himself to a higher standard. I totally get that. I've had that my entire life. But I would urge you to try to find a way to hold yourself to a higher standard and still own forgiveness. Because you can. I feel like I'm getting closer and closer to that myself. There's very much a way that you can say, I will be better, but I also accept where I am right now.
Yeah.
Escape and recover is really important. Give yourself that recovery time. And then the last thing I heard you say was there was basically just like focus on the positive. Really easy to be like, man, the industry is shit. But it's also really easy to be like, man, it's so cool how many indie companies are getting formed right now. And that second one, the person who focuses on that second one is far more likely to be resilient in this time period because they're just not quite as crushed by the crappy stuff. Those are my main takeaways. How does that all land for you?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was getting onto, and then I felt myself going into a Tim monologue about lots of other things that are kind
We
of
love your Tim
flying
monologues.
around my brain. But another thing that you can consider is resilience does take effort. It can get tiring. Some days you're going to be super resilient. It's like water off a duck's back. Other days, like, I don't know, you could drop your toast you made and your dog eats it and you get really sad, which definitely didn't happen to me on Saturday. There's
I'm sorry. Do we need to have a moment of silence for the toast?
just like F's in the chat for my toast, guys.
F's in the chat for toast.
But you can also structure your activities in lots of different ways. So let's look at it from a candidate looking for a job perspective, which is very relevant for this conversation. You could have, maybe posting your portfolio on social media and interacting within groups of like-minded communities, such as the Indie Game Academy. That can be one type of activity type. The other activity type could be going through the different job boards and looking for jobs that fit your requirements and either putting them in a spreadsheet or something to apply to later or applying to them then and there. The other is maintaining your network garden and chatting to people that you've met. Perhaps there's someone who is kind of semi-mentoring you or that you just made some good friends with or something like that. And the other is upskilling your own skills or working on a personal project or just doing something fun for yourself, because that is still working towards getting a job. You've got to keep yourself in a good space as well. So whenever you're doing one of those tasks, if you're kind of losing the motivation for it and you're thinking, I cannot be bothered typing my address into a bloody ATS system, even though it's already on my CV and all that kind of stuff, you can kind of switch your energy and go to whichever task kind of draws you more towards the fun, which is kind of what I do. I mean, I've got my Right Finder stuff, I've got the Cheeky Sausage stuff for our tabletop RPG. So on the days where I might have just done 3 business pitches to different game studios and I'm absolutely knackered and I don't want to do any more recruitment, I'll be like, right, I'm going to retreat to my creative space now. I'm going to write this country history for this fantasy country, and that's going to give me a little bit of energy to then go and network and annoy Willem for a bit and send him lots of gifts, all that kind of thing. And you can
And Lord of the Rings quotes. That's like 50% of our communication.
You use your own ebbs and flows and kind of optimize them for what you want to do. And some very good advice my business partner Ian at Right Finder gave me when I was beating myself up one day is that if you're going to goof off productively. Like I have a personal awful habit of sitting and doom scrolling on LinkedIn or Instagram or TikTok or whatever's taken my kind of focus that day. So now if I might sit down at my desk and by 9:30 I'm done. So go for a walk, cook some good food, read a book, listen to a D&D podcast or whatever it is that kind of gives me a bit of recovery and a little bit of galvanization, and give yourself permission to do that. And I appreciate not everyone will have the work from home setup that I have, where I can literally just do whatever I want whenever. But I think it's important to carve out those little places of refuge and just kind of treat them like those air pockets if you're swimming underwater in a cave or something like that. I think
I love that.
You can keep switching your efforts to different things and kind of drive the whole forward. So rather than focusing on a niche, just look at your whole thing of, I'm looking for a job and networking in games and generally building my profile. Lots of different components there, and you can kind of push them all forward individually, and gradually the whole will move forward as well.
I love that. I think, there's something I know that I personally dealt with and that I think other people dealt with as well. Or deal with as well is the guilt of taking those moments, like, oh, I could be working right now. But I would point you to, here's my perfect metaphor that has no flaws whatsoever, Goku. Goku works out hard. He goes hard. That dude, I'm sure, could network like a champion. But in addition to networking like a champion, he also eats hard. He also rests hard. He also takes his breaks. I mean, the whole entire freaking Frieza arc, he's in a freaking bath, the whole time. So maybe take a 3-day bath if that's what you need. I think taking the time off is important. I want to throw in one thing here, though, that I've been thinking about because I was asked this the other day. For those who know Dennis, he used to be our product manager at the Indie Game Academy. He's an awesome dude. He works at EA now. And he asked me, he was impressed by how much stuff I was doing. Because we did a bunch of stuff at GDC this year. We really presented ourselves well at GDC this year. We really got a lot of attention at GDC this year. And he basically asked just, how do I keep it going, me, Willem? And my answer that I want to throw into this pile of really wonderful practical tips is a little bit more on the sort of like aspirational side. I work really hard on a daily basis because, number one, the selfish reason, I don't want to work a 9-to-5 the rest of my life, and I want to enable myself to work for myself. Number two, the more aspirational side, I find the gatekeeping of the industry absolutely fucking ridiculous, and I would like to destroy it, please. And number three, I just love what I get from other people when I'm able to help them. So I have this sort of like self-interested motivation. I have this like aggressive, like anger-oriented ambition or motivation. But then third, I have this like generative, like sweet and kind motivation. And those three things keep me working on a regular basis. And when I am feeling down, when I am like, oh, everything sucks, which happens, by the way, we all go through those days and it's okay. It gets me up often the next day and I can get back at it. So the reason I say that is, maybe investigate if you don't already know. Probably a lot of you already know, but maybe investigate some of those higher purpose or aspirational goals as well. Because if you can identify a few of them and hold on to them, and they can fluctuate, by the way, it doesn't need to be like a golden rule forever and always. It'll keep you going even when everything else sucks. And that's definitely something to do with resilience I'd like to put in.
No, I'd 100% agree with that, Willem.
Amazing. I also see Mapuzo in the chat. On your take on gatekeeping, can we be best friends? Yes! I was put on this planet to destroy all the gates. They're stupid and unnecessary, and we can exist without them. There needs to be like a little bit of gatekeeping. Not even gatekeeping, let's not call it that. There needs to be a little bit of like fence keeping. What's the smaller version of gatekeeping?
I don't know, like fence maintenance or oiling the gate.
Sure, yeah. Like, not everybody can just get a job like that. We all got to work for it to a certain degree. But yeah, my like personal goal, the goal of the Indie Game Academy, is to see a world where all indie developers can support themselves financially. Like, you're gonna have to put in some work to get that, but if you can put in the work, you should be able to support yourselves. And it's so dumb that we've built an industry where we're hiring the same people on a daily basis and freaking expecting 3 years of work for an entry-level job. Just insane.
Sometimes requirements for entry-level jobs are ridiculous, and it's why I only work with game studios that kind of match my vibe and match Rightfinder's vibe. I did a post yesterday saying I don't work with duckheads, which was an unfortunate typo. But I've had it particularly in other industries and certain places in games where they're like, oh, we're looking for an entry-level person, but they must have X years experience in this. I'm like, well, first of all, years experience, that can be ageist, Why are you looking at breadth of experience when you're not looking at depth? And I think a lot of that is on recruitment people in general to challenge those perceptions of hiring managers, because I often ask them, what do you actually want from those years of experience? They're like, well, we just want someone who can do X, Y, Z and can work within a pipeline. And it's like, well, people who have done game jams, people who have done their own projects and done this, they've already exemplified they can do those jobs. So why not have a chat with them, find out what they can do? And you've got a probation period within any job as well, where you kind of see if it's a fit two ways anyway. And that's often a way that you can get studios to kind of change their thinking in that regard. But it does involve having the hard conversations, and not every kind of vendor, supplier or internal team can do that. I think without going on a huge rant about the recruitment industry, because I'm sure we've all had our horror stories, I certainly have. There's a big kind of fear of taking risks or saying no or having difficult conversations. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in order to truly get to a point where it's equitable opportunities for everyone, because we're not there yet.
Yeah. I think okay. Got it. I'm reading the questions to decide who's going to come up on stage first. We'll actually get Rick here, which I think is perfect because his question is awesome. I think to just talk about that point for a second, like it is simply we're in a time period, we're coming out of a time, well, we're still in it. It seems like we're coming out of a time period where people have really had their pick of the litter. And so it's really easy to say, oh, well, you got to have 10 years of experience or whatever for a junior role. But I actually predict this is a couple of years out, I think. So this is not going to be tomorrow. I'm sorry, everybody. I predict we'll get to a period where we've kind of dropped the bottom of the market, and we don't have much junior talent, and suddenly all the talent we do have is really expensive. So hopefully we get there and the junior market sort of naturally increases. But yeah, people have kind of forgotten that juniors are awesome and they bring a lot to the table that a senior literally can't bring to the table. Once you're stuck in your ways, that's great in some ways because you know about all the tech stuff, but it's very bad in other ways. Anyway, community questions time. We've got Rick up on the stage to ask maybe one of my favorite questions, especially with this topic. Rick, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, this has been really fascinating. And I think we've all been in that position or know people who've been in the position where they're putting hundreds of applications out and they just get rejection after rejection. And it just feels like a futile effort to apply at all. So I'm curious, how does a developer put themselves in a position where you start to become a beacon for recruiters, where they're noticing you and reaching out to you rather than you just being noticed amidst the sea of applicants?
No, that's a very good question. The thing to remember with a lot of recruiters, particularly if they're an agent like me, who is a third-party supplier, is we're given specific briefs to find on behalf of the client. So we're looking for very specific skill sets. The things that help people stand out to me are a well filled out and completed LinkedIn. So not just job title at X Studio, but what's your tech stack? What are the kind of things that you've been doing, and what are the kind of projects you've been working on? I was speaking to someone on a one-to-one call the other day and explaining to them that they were a high-level candidate. They've been in the industry for a very long time. And I was like, you've got some great experience and the people in your network who are peers will know exactly what you do. But if you look at the average recruiter, a lot of them maybe have 2 to 3 years professional experience recruiting within games. They might have some understanding of how a game is made and put together, but they won't have the context to know fully inside and out what you do. So to a degree, you need to put out that information to help them help you, if that makes sense. Another thing you can do, if you feel comfortable with it, is don't underestimate the posts feature on LinkedIn. I know it seems like everyone and their dog is trying to be kind of a LinkedIn influencer at the moment, but if you're just talking about the stuff you're doing, you're linking it to your portfolio, blog, personal website, or even just posting it as LinkedIn articles like, hey, here's a breakdown on this thing that I've worked on. That's all extra contextual evidence that we can use to really gain an understanding of what you do, what rough level you're at, but also give us several springboards of potential conversation to have during that screening call. There's a theory called conversational threading for general sort of social interaction. Which is basically, answering a question, hi Tim, what do you do? I'm Tim, I recruit. Whereas if you conversational thread, hi Tim, what do you do? I recruit within games. I focus mainly on artists, designers, and programmers, and I also write lore for a tabletop RPG in development. I also like to do sword fighting. That answer gives you far more context. It gives you several springboards to then explore, and you need to be thinking of your LinkedIn profile, your CV, and any point of interaction a recruiter will have with you as your means of basically crowbarring the door open and getting a conversation with them. So by answering the questions they're likely to ask before they've asked them, it's very helpful. It also, there's a degree of psychology at play. You kind of ingratiate yourself against your competition, the other developers looking for jobs right now, because unfortunately it is a competition. But optimizing it in that way will help you then gradually start to stand out as a beacon. Other things you can do for just kind of quality of life: make sure your portfolio links work, your contact information's up to date. If you're really open to people reaching out to you about jobs, turn on the free to email you function as well, so no one's able to miss out. I know there's a lot of stuff about data scraping and people getting scam requests and stuff like that. So maybe set up a specific email just for your job search. Not only is that a great way to keep your actual email a bit more secure, but you're not going to lose track of any job stuff because it's all in that specific email. So you can go, right, here's all my job applications. It's not getting lost in my gas bill emails or subscriptions to Warhammer World or anything like that. Like I've got, you've got it in sort of a set place. Another thing, some of the candidates that stand out to me the most are ones that kind of interact with me a little bit. I get so many people sending me messages just like, hello, or hello, can you find me a job? Which I can in some cases if I've got a specific brief. Often I'm just giving a bit of advice and sort of being nice and friendly as I can be. But you know, it's when I'm seeing people post their own stuff, they might be commenting on stuff that I've commented on, or even just viewing my profile, that name sort of comes to mind. And especially your headline as well. Don't put, you know, Tim Wood unemployed, put Tim Wood game designer available for work, you know, that kind of thing. Those are all little things that just help us sort of spot you, because there are hundreds of thousands of people in games, and it's, you know, each recruiter is only a human being, and they will miss stuff. They might not look into things as details as they should. So by putting the information right in front of them where they can't miss it at all, they've got no excuse not to consider you. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer, Rick. I hope I've answered it.
No, that's awesome. Like it sounds like you kind of want to treat your LinkedIn as your live resume, but then follow a lot of the marketing principles that any business would want to advertise to the customers, because you as the potential developer are the business advertising to the studios who are going to hire your work. So you want all of those same kinds of resources readily accessible so that they can get all their questions answered without first having to talk to you.
Exactly. It's a method I use when I'm submitting candidates to studios. So when I'm working with a candidate and I send them to ABC Studios, I've just made it up. It probably exists though, but I'll have the candidate's name, their salary, expectations, linked to their LinkedIn, linked to their portfolio, overview of their tech stack. So I'll literally list out all the 3D art software they use or whatever. What's their notice period? If they're relocating, what kind of visa sponsorship will they require? Then I've got maybe a 4 to 5 paragraph biography on who is this person? What have they done? Why do I feel they're a good fit for the studio? And that is there. So when I'm putting it in front of the hiring manager that I'm working for, they're like, oh, everything I need is here. I would like to interview them. And it's making that process seamless and it's making it easy. Whereas if you just ping someone a CV and go, oh, they're a great game designer, well, they're probably not going to use you for recruitment again, but you're also not making it easy for them. People are inherently wanting the easiest way to get things done. They might be overwhelmed. They might be a little bit lazy. They might be tired on a Friday morning when they're reviewing the job applications. So make it as easy as possible. You'll be fine. Something you can think about when you're putting together your LinkedIn profile, any posts or any written form of content, or to be honest, even video calls and stuff like that. There's a principle of copywriting called ADA, which stands for attention, interest, desire, and action. This is one of my biggest things I use, by the way. So feel free to cannibalize it. But you want to grab people's attention first. You want to kind of build up their interest in you and cultivate a desire to then take action, which would be to have a phone call with you, to have you in an interview process and ultimately make a hire. So if you're considering the readers of your profile and your CV, portfolio and that kind of thing, and kind of tailor it to the ideal person you want reading it, it's going to be far more effective. So if your goal is to get a job, make sure you put in all of the sort of hireable stuff in there rather than taking up space with things that might not be as relevant. And that's quite broad advice because each advice for each person's portfolio is quite specific, but if you utilize those marketing principles, as you mentioned, Rick, it's going to be far more effective long term for you. And you've got to kind of treat it like your own mini business in a way. They're very kind of applicable in their methodologies.
Fantastic answer. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, super. Incredible answer. I think I want to throw on there, or really just echo what you've already said, which is, remember, this is something we say all the time. Remember that niching yourself is helpful in this industry, because then if somebody's looking for something specific, they can find you. I really love your methodology here, what you're suggesting, which is kind of like, imagine you're a product. And that's maybe dehumanizing, but that's not how I intend it. And I don't think that's how Tim intends it. What it means is, like, remember that you are literally selling yourselves to these recruiters and then eventually these hiring managers as well. So yes, it's about showing that you have the skills, but also, like, jazz that shit up. Like, think about how you're actually going to look like an attractive, interesting candidate, an attractive, interesting product. Why is it that somebody goes to Starbucks instead of some other store? Because it has a culture, a history behind it, right? Think of it kind of the same way. Maybe Starbucks isn't the best example since we're all gamers. Why is it that somebody like buys, why is it that Baldur's Gate 3 did so well? Because it's got something special to it, right? The depth of play in that game is unlike anything else we've ever seen. So how do you sell yourself, much like you might sell a video game? There's another question here. I'm going to jump over the next question and make sure we can answer this one, because I also think this is a wonderful one. So Studsner doesn't have a mic. I'm going to read it for them. But they say, how can I encourage my friend to work on his portfolio? He very quickly gets overwhelmed and avoids finishing it or networking or putting out applications altogether. Finger snaps.
Okay, so how do you encourage your friend to work on their portfolio? I think to an extent you can encourage people to take positive action, but inherently it kind of has to come from within. My best advice would be, rather than perhaps saying, hey, you should work on your portfolio, it'll be really good for you, perhaps think of what specifically they could do in their portfolio to help them. So like I mentioned earlier about positioning yourself from a sales perspective to get a role. You could look at their portfolio and go, hey, you've got some really lovely artwork on there, for example, but it might help a recruiter more if you talk about your process of creating the art. So did you do any concepting or ideation before working on this finished piece? Can we see it? Do you have it being made over time in progress? What software packages did you use if it's digital art, or what traditional art techniques did you use if you were doing it in this specific way? Have you considered adding your contact details to the portfolio? When it comes to networking, are they the type of individual that can only really do 5 connect requests a week or a day? Let's break that down into manageable chunks and work with them to create a sort of a timeline framework that they're comfortable with. I mean, in terms of specific advice for this individual, I don't know them. I can't speak to their kind of how they like to operate or their psychology, but I think understanding the root cause of why perhaps they feel overwhelmed and why they don't want to network can then lead to solutions. So if it feels overwhelming because you're getting constantly rejected, and you're just worried about getting work and perhaps thinking about getting a work in another industry for a little bit whilst you apply for jobs, let's break that down. Let's look at the fact that they've, carried on to this extent and they've got their existing portfolio of work. How can we build on that? Maybe they need to take some time away to work on their portfolio and add more design or art or whatever type of portfolio it is and kind of bolster it up a little. Or maybe they want to read about the ADA principle and, apply that to their portfolio. But I think, it sounds like you're a very supportive person this person has in their sphere, and that's great. I think keep showing up for them, keep encouraging them. Maybe some people that would like to see their portfolio. Maybe you're connected to some recruiters. Perhaps you're listening to one now who will look at the portfolio. You can kind of help them from that regard, and just kind of, I guess, constructive advice and things are more helpful to people that are less motivated. I've got friends myself who I desperately want to just like take over for them because I know how to do it. But instead I'm like, rather than going, hey, do this, I'm like, oh, if you do X, Y, and Z, you will have a much higher likelihood of success, and just kind of coach them in that regard, but also be careful for yourself as well, like how much energy you're putting into things, because you've got to look after your own self too. And it might be a case that if they struggle to network, maybe you know some people that they'd benefit from connecting to, and you just facilitate an introduction. Even that's sort of useful, and hopefully over time they'll get that motivation and that message to not give up on that portfolio and keep it a live and evolving document.
Yeah, I love that. I think I would echo. I really have 2 points that I'd say about this. That the kinder, gentler, more helpful side. Think about this actually maybe like a game design problem. In game design, the main thing that we're thinking about really is motivation. How do we get somebody to do something or engage with a piece of content or go on a quest or whatever? And for this, it sounds like the motivation isn't there. Probably they're feeling a bunch of the pressure of the industry because this industry is rough. And so they're feeling kind of overwhelmed. The motivation that they probably have at this point, and I would guess what they're hearing from other people most, is like, well, you got to do it or you're screwed. And that's an extremely negative motivation. So it's hard, especially for some people and some types of people, to use that correctly. So perhaps experiment with what motivates them correctly. And when you start to notice what motivates them, then double down on that as well. So I love what you're saying, Tim. Just putting them in contact with other people can be its own motivational force. Putting them in groups and communities, have them come join Indie Game Academy and come do a networking or portfolio session with us. The second thing I'd say though is a little bit more self-serving, which is like it is unfortunately not your responsibility. It's wonderful that you're doing this for them, but also make sure you're protecting yourself. And at some point, perhaps like there's nothing you can do. I think you should try, but especially if it's affecting. I want all of you to try to help your friends. But especially if it's affecting your personal well-being and your personal mental health, I think at some point you do have to kind of leave people to figure it out for themselves, because perhaps you're actually not helping, and perhaps they need to be just left alone or something. You don't know. Love that. All right, we've got 2 more questions, so let's try to get them through. We've got Gianna coming up on stage. Gianna, would you like to ask your question?
Hey, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. So, first thing, thank you so much for just being here and giving such great advice. It's so helpful and so comforting to hear. And for my question, I don't know if this is like completely on topic with resiliency, but I've been struggling a lot with actually landing interviews, getting past that like just checking your resume stage. And that's been like really weighing down on me with the resiliency when people won't really give you a chance at the entry level. So what are your tips for landing that interview, since I have no professional gaming experience, but I have a lot of volunteer experience?
Sure. First of all, and this is directly specific to you, Gianna, but you can find me on LinkedIn or Discord. If you send me a copy of your CV, I'm more than happy to have a look at it, and I'll give you very direct and honest feedback on it, and we can kind of workshop on that together. So that we'll cover that. But in general, in terms of getting that first interview, one of the things we need to remember right now is that the market is very competitive. In terms of how a internal recruitment team are thinking from a psychological perspective right now, there are a lot of people on the market. It's a quote unquote great time to be a studio hiring because it's a talent rich environment. And they've got sort of as Willem mentioned earlier, the pick of the litter in a lot of ways. So it's not just you in that process with them getting an interview. They're going to be comparing you against everyone else applying for the job. Because so many people are jobless right now, the amount of applicants per roles I'm hearing from some of my internal contacts are 50 to 100 people per role. And it's utterly overwhelming. I think... you've got a lot of voluntary experience, and you've clearly, you're here today. You're doing all of the extracurricular stuff to sort of level yourself up. So I think having that kind of first and foremost in your CV is probably the most relevant thing to do. You might already be doing this in your CV, so apologies if I'm teaching you to suck eggs. But rather than just saying, I'm Tim Wood, game designer, I designed a game. You could talk about the specific things that you've done as part of your voluntary project. So maybe you've done some IGA courses like level 1 to level 3, or you might have taken part in some game jams, but talk about the stuff that you're doing and your process behind it. talk about the things that you've achieved with it or delivered with it, and kind of try and break it down into as much kind of quantitative analysis as possible. If you can do things like talk about your average turnaround time for things, or how you've actioned certain sorry, my brain's going a bit weird today. Certain methods, that's very helpful for recruiters. I think with your existing professional experience, if you have worked in other industries before, that's definitely relevant stuff to keep on the CV as well, because it gives you contextual information on how this person works in a company. You might need to get creative with the types of roles that you're looking for. Being kind of new into games and entry level is a bit of a double-edged sword, because it's very competitive, but also there's lots of different routes to entry. So if you're more art focused, maybe there is a co-development studio out there looking for people to do quality assurance on things like art clipping in a game. Find your entry route that way. It might be finding one or two indie studios that have recently got funding and seeing if they're open to a fractional role. The way you can do that, if you go on Crunchbase and make use of their free trial, you can see all the companies that have recently got a significant amount of funding. They're likely to be the ones that are growing. They are also likely to be the ones that are still kind of being quite discerning with who they bring in, but they're not going to be using recruitment agencies. They're not going to be posting jobs all over LinkedIn. So therefore, their entry point into the market is quite limited. So if you go after the people that you feel you can solve a problem for, you're going to at least make some very good contacts. And these indie founders know a lot of people, and they're all connected to each other. Peer reviews are always useful. Get other people to look at your CV. There might be something that's glaringly obvious to one person that might not be obvious to yourself. I would keep networking within this Discord server. Definitely send me an ad on LinkedIn. You can add me to your network and have a look at your sort of CV and resume that way. And ultimately, that there is a degree of keep on carrying on. Yes, the market is hyper competitive for people right now, but we are seeing more studios form. We are seeing angel investors and venture capitalist firms coming back into games. Like, there is going to be an uptick, and there will be opportunities. It's very nebulous, and it's rubbish to hear that right now, because you're like, I just want to work and do your job. And it's kind of waiting for the industry to settle down and all that detritus to go back to the sea floor. But I think if you keep iterating on your CV, make sure it relates back to your LinkedIn, keep that as an evolving document, and keep it all kind of working together in that sort of that structure and framework, you'll gradually get there. And also, just like I said before, answering the other questions, make that CV as easy to read for recruiters as possible. You're going to hear advice, keep your CV to 1 page, 2 pages, and make it blue and all this kind of stuff. Honestly, I don't care about that as a headhunter myself. What I want is a sort of a good summary on who a person is and what their journey is and what they can do. Can they solve a need for the client that has asked me to find someone? If so, I will give them a call, or, well, I'll give everyone an email first and set up a call, but that's how I'd begin the conversation. Have I answered your question, Gianna? Because I have gone on a little monologue again.
You definitely have. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Amazing. You love those monologues, Tim, but they're good monologues.
Just happen.
If they were crappier, I'd interrupt you more. I'll throw a little bit more in there. I think a lot of your tips there, Tim, were really wonderful, and some are ones that I actually haven't heard before, like going and looking at companies that have recently received funding and then reaching out to them preemptively and seeing if they need anything, even fractional work. And by the way, fractional work just means part-time, if you're unfamiliar with that term. To throw out some stuff, because this is a topic I care about a lot that I know will be useful to all of you. And this is advice you've heard before. The best thing you can do is remember Tim's first piece of practical advice, which is to focus on what you can do, what you are in control of. And something that you are in control of is releasing your own titles. So it absolutely counts. Like when somebody says they need 3 years of experience, it absolutely counts if that 3 years is you running your own studio. There's ways to make it count more. Those games should actually be released. Those games should be released with a team, preferably under some kind of actual business entity. But even if it's not a real business entity, just coming up, actually sort of air quotes here, starting a studio helps a lot. Actually monetizing them, and really like doing your best to make this a financially viable game. That is all actual applicable experience that you can do right now. And there's wonderful places like here, the Indie Game Academy, but also plenty of other ones. Work with Indies is one of our favorites. Remote Game Jobs is one of our favorites that you can go and find people to do that with. That's why everybody talks about game jams, because it's an easy opportunity to fit into your life. And then I think I'd echo the last thing you said there, Tim, which is like every step is a step. Like even if you're working at some non-game industry job, that's actually still progress towards the game industry, because one, you're keeping yourself financially viable, you're still making money, and the game industry is hopefully settling down during that time, if nothing else. But then in addition, you're proving that you're hireable, you're proving that you're manageable, you're proving that you have a work ethic, and all of that still counts, still helps. So right this second, it might be a long cut for you to get into the industry, but you can do it. And I think sort of just insisting that you be one of the best candidates that you can possibly be. Look at other people's portfolios that inspire you and do what they did, is all you can do maybe, but can be a lot. Amazing. All right, so we are over time, but it's because I'm having a great time. I would like us to do the question of the day and then a final question that I've been promising Mapuzo in the comments, and then we're going to say goodbye. Right. So question of the day. For everybody in the chat, get your fingers on the keyboard. The first person to type the answer correctly to this question gets 3 House Cup points. If you're listening, speak it out loud for me. What is the acronym that Tim gave us to use when you're building your portfolio to tell a wonderful story? And what are the pieces? I don't just want the acronym. What are the words in that acronym? Spell them all out for me. The acronym is indeed ADA. If you said that, congratulations. 9 says, shit. There we go. Attention, interest, desire, and action with a space in it. Nice. Yes, indeed. A marketing tool to get attention for your product, but I love that as something to use on your own portfolios. It's not something I've heard before. So yes,
literally
employ
everything.
Awesome. Hell yeah. Employ it on your portfolio, in your resume, in your LinkedIn, and all of it. How do you move a recruiter or hiring manager from interested to action? All right, Mapuzo, ask our last question of the day. We have.
Hello, can you hear me?
There we go.
Hey.
Yes.
Okay. Well, just a quick. I'm Fitzgerald Lewis. Nice to meet you all.
Hello.
I am scrolling up because I have forgotten the question. I have bad short-term memory, so bear with me.
That's okay. I believe it was asking about.
It's on candidate sourcing for startup studios that need to save on runway. But before we do that, can I just say one thing about resumes?
Sure,
if that's all right. So
keep it brief for me, but yes.
Say this as like a general pro tip. When I was getting trained on how to vet resumes, I was told, because we would get, when I was working for Bethesda, we would get, for QA, when I was in that department, 600 resumes in like a week, because those are people that are hungry for their entry-level opportunity.
Oh, we may have lost Mapuzo. He was probably. They're probably going on like a beautiful rant right now. The Wi-Fi. Why don't we? Oh no!
I've seen the advice Mapuzo posted. Okay. I also don't want to steal their thunder.
If they pop back in, we'll have them do their rant. Why don't you answer the question at least, for the sake of time here? So the question is, now I've lost it. Way up.
I think I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh,
yeah, there we go.
There you are.
We lost you for a bit.
My PC rebooted.
Amazing. We've lost you again. Yeah, so why don't you, Tim, at least answer this question for now. Do you have any recommendations on candidate sourcing for a startup studio trying to save on runway? How do you do that?
Yeah, so first of all, I think we've all seen a lot of Amir Satvat's work. There is a fantastic spreadsheet that is accessible by anyone to find candidates who are currently open to work due to the layoffs. I don't remember the exact number. Sadly, it keeps going up, but there's literally thousands. So that's usually my first port of call when looking for, as we call it, talent. Other advice that I can give you, you might have to spend a little money to make some money. If you get yourself a free trial of the LinkedIn recruiter license, you're able to use the recruiter search to find people's profiles. So I mean, that's something I can do perhaps a session on how do recruiters find profiles maybe, but it's essentially a combination of what we call Boolean strings and keyword matching, and that can lead to assessment. The other, if you take the principles of Ada, which I've shared earlier, you can apply that to job advert writing. If you're posting adverts as a social post on LinkedIn, not only have you got a job advert that will hopefully attract lots of people to your sphere and to the roles that you're hiring for, but you've also put together your initial sales pitch when you're connecting with people that you want to hire. A lot of it is kind of DIY recruitment. If you've got limited runway as a studio, those are good ways to find candidates. Using these kind of networks that you're already in, Mapuzo, is a great way of finding people that might be more open to part-time or fractional roles. Kind of just being loud and proud out there. I mean, it's always a positive narrative right now when a studio is hiring. So in terms of that recruitment marketing methodology, there's no better time to put it out there that you're hiring for roles, and you can include that with graphics. You can just do it as a general text post. I would always say advertise each role individually. If you are advertising, because otherwise they kind of get lost in the ether. It also gives you a lot more content to post and build that momentum up on LinkedIn as well. You know, using people like recruitment agencies can be very difficult. There might be some that will just do the bulk of the sourcing for you and deliver you a list of names that you can then use, and that'll be a lot cheaper. But it really depends on where the studio's at and what you're doing. Because of the influx of talent on the market right now, I would say a direct hire approach is probably the best way to do it. Make sure people can find you, make sure that the kind of careers page works, your careers email works, and it's easy for people to get in contact. And also look at your recruitment process. I've personally had success placing candidates when they might be halfway through a process with a studio asking them to do 5 interviews and a test. But the studio I'm hiring for is an agile indie. They maybe have 2 stages and maybe like a bit of a meet the team meet and greet, and it's a lot faster and a lot agile than the bigger studio. And they've taken the job there because they felt ingratiated to the culture and the fact that they are treated, more like a human being with time that they need to spend on other things, not just work. So think about it from the empathy perspective of what do candidates need right now. And I think if you can kind of dot all those I's and cross all those T's together, you're going to be in a really strong position. But yeah, I'd say probably your biggest strength is your narrative. You're hiring right now and you've got opportunities to give people. People love that. You'll probably get inundated with applications, which is a great position to be in. So then you've kind of got the luxury of going through those profiles and having a look. But I'd say probably a mere Satvart spreadsheet first. A lot of the work's been done to gather people immediately available, and then you can gradually start your own search thing. In my mind, I would go Amir Satvart's network, job adverts, and then direct search if neither of those former 2 work.
I want to throw in one thing there, which is something that Tim said just now and also earlier, which is that it is a wonderful time to be hiring. So if you're struggling to break in, maybe just start a game studio, question mark, go for it. I believe in you. All right. So before we end, I will give you like 60 seconds here. You got cut off there by the wonders of technology. Do you want to give some of those thoughts that you were going to give?
I just wanted to say that, when I was doing QA hiring, I was told to vet resumes and skim over them with 5 to 6 seconds spent, no more than that. Mm-hmm. So that means that you get quote unquote 5 to 6 seconds to have something that catches my eye on your resume, so when you're crafting your resume, put yourself in the shoes of someone who has to go through hundreds of resumes and make it, something that I can see on the page that grabs my attention, that, whether it's some people use a pop of color, some people, try to use a different layout style, just something that's different, but also, effective. It should be professional. It should have the right kind of stewardship of you and who you are. And so I would just say that that's really, if you can put yourself in the shoes of people who might be reviewing your resume or have a family member or friend say, what sucks about my resume, that can help you get that thing that gets the recruiter's attention. Would you guys agree with that?
I would agree with that. I also loved your advice in the chat earlier, Rapiza, about naming your CV your name. The amount of times I get my resume in an email, and I'm just like, if I didn't rename them all, there would be about 1,000 my resumes in there.
Yeah.
One thing I see a lot, people rate themselves on skills a lot. And I love that as a kind of, this is where I think I'm at. But I have come across a lot of maybe more technical CVs where they're like, I'm a 10 out of 10 on C++, for example. And sometimes they are not what a hiring manager would consider 10 out of 10, because in some cases people don't know what they don't know. So I'd say probably veer away from that kind of thing. That can be seen as a little bit of an amber flag by more sort of strict or harsh recruiters. I like to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. But that's just something to consider as well. Using lots of complicated elements and formatting types might not be beneficial as well. If you're going into an applicant tracking system, there isn't an algorithm that's going to go through and use AI and stuff to throw you away. But sometimes it can just make your CV look really weird, and it's really hard to just actually read and go through. And if someone's got 250 CVs they've got to review by Friday, they might just skip over you. That does happen a lot in internal companies. So just bear those in mind as well. And if you're looking for helpful free design, I use Canva a lot, and there's a lot of CV templates on there you can use. I know Word does them, Google Docs. Have a look, have a play, and look for something that screams you. If you want to get super technical, you can match the color popper of your CV to the company's logo that you're applying for. I do that on my pitch.
That's a good tip. Yeah, I resonate with that. I use a pop of blue since it's my favorite color for just headers on companies I worked for and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So just
Beautiful.
Just a personal flavor of yours that it's tasteful and carefully applied will go a long way.
Love that. Yeah, I think the only comment I would make on that is just make sure the information is first, meaning you aren't making it harder to gain the information a recruiter needs because of your pop. More important that they get the right information. We are far over time. This has been a wonderful episode, which is part of why we gave it this extra time. Hopefully you enjoyed listening. So it is time for us to wrap down. Before then, Tim, as always, we love to ask for, thank you, Mapuzo, for the question and the thoughts. Before we leave, Tim, do you have a piece of homework you can give that the listeners can do in the next week? Take about an hour or so. That'll help them practice some of what we talked about here today.
Absolutely. Well, there's currently 16 of you in the audience. If you're struggling to network, perhaps you can network with each other if you're not already in contact. One or two of you have already reached out to connect to me. I invite all of you to connect with me, especially if you've got follow-up questions or stuff you want me to have a look at for you. Maybe come up with your checkpoints for what you're going to do for yourself each day. Are you going to have a little coffee at 11 and then a bit of lunch at another point and a walk? Maybe build 3 things into your day that you can use as your daily check-in checkpoints. That you can then build all of the work around, so you've got a bit of oasis of calm and fun. And share it with me as well. I'd love to hear what you've got.
Amazing. So it sounds like the homework is to create a couple of checklists for yourself about what you're going to get done each day. Is that right?
Yes.
Awesome. Share that with us, especially on LinkedIn. Tag us in Indie Game Academy, tag Tim Wood. And if you're feeling like you don't want to share it publicly, you can always come to the Discord and share it there. This has been the Indie Game Lunch Hour. We have this every single week, 12 p.m. Eastern Time, so feel free to swing by and join us for the next one. We would love to have you. There's links to join down below. Tim, thank you so much for being here and answering questions. As always, you're a freaking legend. We're going to have to do another one, absolutely, where you join in your armor, though. I'm a little upset that I still didn't get it.
We'll do an armored session soon, I promise.
Awesome, yeah. I'll make you a deal. If you come in your armor, I'll come in my wizard outfit, and then we can have a little.
I'll take that deal.
A little D&D party. All right, so that's gonna do it for today. Thank you everybody for being here and asking your questions, and thank you to those listening. As always, it would be incredibly helpful to us if you would share this podcast with just one other person that you think could use this information that you learned here today. Who is one person who you think needs to hear this? All right, that's going to be it. We'll see you next week, Wednesday at 12 p.m. It's been a joy. Goodbye,
Thanks, everyone. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.